Nice to meet you, John.
Good to meet you too.
I want to take advantage of our time for sure because there's some questions that I have.
Great.
First of all, congratulations on
Thank
House
you.
of David.
Thank you.
It's been insane, to say the least.
It's an insane moment, man.
Yeah.
I'm shocked, in a state of shock and awe that God can use anybody, I think, is the theme to the story. But it's been cool to see the reaction to the show has far surpassed anything that we had hoped or dreamed.
Right.
Which is really cool.
Yeah. Well, I was going to go into a lot of your past history, but I want to kind of skip that because we don't have a ton of time today.
Yeah. I've got some time.
I want to jump into.
I'm on the bubble. You know what? Let's just go because I might catch another flight.
Okay.
Give me an excuse to stay with my family for one more day.
All right. Well, let's jump back then. Let's start with quick history. You started off in like sports broadcasting, right? And then you kind of jumped around, did a bunch of different jobs, but then eventually started Kingdom Story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What does that time look like for you? Why start Kingdom Story? What did that look like with you and your brother?
So basically, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, deep south. It was an ADHD nightmare as a kid. I literally had to do kindergarten twice because I was a disturbance to the class. And so when I was 15, a cameraman got sick at my, and I was on an ESPN football game for the University of Alabama. Yeah. And I was an intern for another cameraman for my church, and his name Mike. And he called me and said, like, hey, this cameraman got sick, so there's an open spot. It was like 3 hours before the game. Yeah. He's like, get over here right now. Don't tell anyone you've never done this before. Don't mention how old you are for sure. And so my dad drove me over to the stadium, and I had the time of my life. I literally met my vocational passion right there. Yeah. The camera was strong enough to zoom into the moon. It was like a telescope, and so I'm this 15-year-old like homeschooled kid that was like zooming the camera in and out of the moon. Like, this is the coolest thing I've ever done. I can't believe this. Yeah. And so that's how my story started. And so I started working for a cameraman, a crewing agent called me the next week, and I guess they had looked at a manifest from that game and said, are you a freelance camera operator from Birmingham, Alabama? I honestly didn't know if that was like 3 different jobs or the same job. So I just said, yes, I'm that. I do that. I do that all the time. I'm a professional of that. And so then I started just working for ESPN just about every weekend. And my dad bought me a camera when I was 16 with money he did not have, and helped me get a loan for $10,000 to start a production company. But the first thing we did was we went to Israel. That camera came in like on a Wednesday. Yeah. It was called the Canon XL1 for the nerds out there. And then we went to Israel like on a Friday. I had no idea how to use this camera, and we did like a walk and talk documentary called In the Steps of Jesus. And it was just he and I. And so we stayed in the old city of Jerusalem. Yeah. And I had never traveled out of America, so the whole Bible just sprang to life in ways that were pretty magical. My parents were, very good to like Bible reading, Bible memorization was like an essential part of growing up. And so like I kind of knew the material, but it kind of sprang to life in ways that...
And how old were you?
I was 16.
Okay. Around the same time I went for the first time.
Oh, yeah, really?
Yeah.
That's so cool. It'll change your life.
100%, 1,000%.
Like, it's amazing. And you just feel history in ways... like I remember walking the Stations of the Cross, the Via Dolorosa, and there was places where you put your hand that are said to be where Jesus put his hand. And I say this as a Baptist. Like, I was born and raised. I'm not. The mystical is not typically in my upbringing.
Which is funny. Talking about House of David.
Yeah, with House of David was very mystical show. But I almost felt like an electric pulse through my body. I remember that feeling when I touched that wall, and I think it was just the thousands of years of history, and this 1 square mile has been so influential, and this is where Jesus walked. But I went to David's tomb there, and I remember that spark of curiosity.
Wait,
starting
the real
right
one
there.
or the one that they say is David's tomb?
Who knows? Who knows? I didn't know there was a backup. I did like Church of the Holy Sepulchre garden tomb. I knew about that, but I only knew of at the time one David's tomb. I'm sure the real one's somewhere.
Sure.
But yeah, whatever the I went to the touristy one, and like the spark of curiosity went off right there, and we just started. My brother and I started directing a ton of music videos and a lot of like all kinds of stuff before that. you know, they say success is long obedience in the same direction.
Right,
Malcolm
right.
Gladwell calls it like the 10,000 hour rule, and just did all kinds of stuff. And a lot of Christian music videos. We won Music Video of the Year 3 years in a row.
Wow.
But it was just a career, man. It was just a gig to gig to gig, you know. So we called ourselves, we're like the Han Solo of Christianity. Like, if you got money, we got a ship, we'll fly you somewhere, and the rest is your problem.
Yeah.
And then I went and worked, I directed second unit on a Christian film, Courageous, that was being done. Sony was doing it, and Real Cinderella Story was being done by Sherwood Church down in Georgia. So it was a church making, and Stephen and Alex at the time, Kendrick, were making their movies primarily with church volunteers at Sherwood. So it was like 1,000 church volunteers working on this film. And they wanted to do some action sequences involving cars, which you should never combine with church volunteers.
Right.
Somebody would die. And so it was my job. They wanted to film on this camera that I could tell you my story in cameras. I'm a nerd for cameras.
Okay.
And they wanted to film on this camera, the Red One, which was kind of the first alternative film. And we owned a couple of them, and I was an expert at that camera. So I set up that pipeline for them.
Owns Red, by the way.
Isn't that crazy? Make a medium format, small box camera, Red. Anyway, but at any rate, you know, I did that. And also directed the action sequences. So I took, you know, a small group of professionals away to do the stunt work, so nobody died, and did the action sequences in that show, and it was great. And Alex Kendrick asked me, you know, what's your purpose and the purpose of your work, was like the first question out of his mouth, and I could not answer the question, and not only could I not answer it, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and that led to a huge jump. And a scary jump, which was, instead of being a service company, like a production company, to start raising money for independent faith-based feature films, and sort of jumping in. And it's cool to be a part of, like, it's a privilege to be a part of anything that's like emerging right in front of you. And
100%,
you can't know if that's going to happen or not, and to be a part of that is really, really cool. And so
because it feels like in that moment that God's choosing you to be that person.
Yeah, well, I think
you can't guess it.
God's
right?
yeah. It's just like you feel a destiny to it, and kind of right time, right place, and also just a bunch of good people. So there's this small group of filmmakers, my brother and I, Dallas Jenkins, and obviously, and Brett McCorkle and John Gunn, who's making the show with me, and certainly the Kendricks and Devon Franklin. There's just a group of us that are sort of kind of like bleeding in the arena of whatever this becomes, but with some sort of faith that there's a bunch of talented people behind us, and it's our job to kind of break the wall down, and that's a privilege. And you certainly bleed on the bleeding edge, but it's a privilege to be a part of an emerging kind of industry.
So Kingdom Story obviously has been super successful, done a lot of amazing things recently. Most recently, we've seen Jesus Revolution and
thank you.
The Best Christmas Project Ever.
Dallas's movie, sure.
But obviously a bunch of stuff recently with Kingdom Story. But you also launched Wonder Project. Sure. Tell me about the transition there. Like, why launch this new company? Why not just do everything with Kingdom Story?
It's a great question that sometimes you think this idea is so crazy, but the dream that became Wonder is Kingdom Story Company, of which I'm grateful to be a founding member of, and love the work that we've done and that we do. Is a production company, and when you're a production company, you sort of like, you're trying to get studios to fund your stuff, and so you sort of feel as if you're building everyone else's house, and they're all built on sand.
Right.
So when we did the deal with Lionsgate, John Feldheimer, the CEO, and Michael Burns, who's become a great friend and mentor in my life, the chairman, said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I really want to be seen as an entrepreneur first and a filmmaker second."
Interesting. Okay.
And I love the design of how things work, and I love to study companies as if they were machines, and so I really, for 5 years, they said, "Great, entrepreneurism drives this building forward, have at it." And so I was like a gerbil that was let out of its cage, man. And so I really studied that building, and I just began to think, I think we can be the studio. Instead of just a production company working for studios, I think we could actually form a studio itself.
Right.
And that means that you have to raise a unbelievable amount of money, and you know, that's a crazy idea and dream. But I felt, you know, one of the most inspiring things to me is if you watch the House of David trailer, the first logo to come up is MGM. It's Leo the Lion. It's famous, and it says 100 years of entertainment. That's kind of the dream that became Wonder, of like, could there be a studio that could you know, fund the projects like the production company that we had made, like Kingdom Story Company, and they're, you know, with Kingdom, we were doing a film Sarah's Oil together. They're producers on House of David, but also, could you create a place where other production companies, other people could have their dream fulfilled as well, and could there be an actual studio that exists to make this type of content for a very, very long time, and could you actually make something that had a chance, if it were successful, to last 100 years? And that's a crazy idea, but and I'm reminded daily about how crazy this dream is. But that's the dream that became Wonder, and then House of David is the first release for that independent studio. Yeah,
I was listening to Andy recently, your brother, and he said during a talk that I was at, he was like, you know, I've been blessed with a brother who has way more ambition than I do.
He will live longer, I guarantee it. I love my brother, and you know, I remember the moment where Brent McCorkle, who I directed Jesus Revolution with, while Andy was in post on American Underdog that we did together, pitched this idea for what has become the sequel to I Can Only Imagine. And I remember telling Andy, like, you got to direct this movie with Brent, and you know, it went so well with me with Jesus Revolution. Brent's amazing, and so it's cool to see him stepping into that movie, and I joke around with him that I hope to get him over to direct an episode of House of David with me, but the television's fast and hard, and nobody gets paid as much. And but I love him, and it's, again, if you think about a tree that's growing out into its branches, to think about what's going on right now at just a few companies and the amount of projects that are happening. You know, we're doing House of David. Dallas is going into the main event with you know, with the Chosen season 6. Andy and Brent are doing the sequel to I Can Only Imagine. It's all sort of happening, and it's just this unbelievable moment to be a part of in any way. I tend to gravitate to the unplowed field and whatever's new and challenging and crazy, and so that, you know, television was, after Jesus Revolution, I just felt like I wanted to try something really different, and so television is what I've always wanted to tell the story of David. It's been like the quest of my career. And you can't do it as a movie. It has to be a series.
100%.
So that was sort of my quest, and then Andy sort of set his sights on I Can Only Imagine too. But we're all sort of in this together. So
let's just jump into House of David, because obviously this is Wonder Project's first thing that's coming out. And maybe we'll talk about the future, what things are looking like in the future for Wonder Project. But so House of David was on my radar probably a little over a year ago.
Cool.
It was the first time that I got wind of it and heard about it. There's actually a group here in the Nashville area that meets, like, a Christian creative group. And so there's someone that was there that was like mentioning, hey, we've heard about the show, or we're working part of the show, or doing something, and it's looking really good, and like cool. Excited about it. So that's when I kind of got wind of it, and then you know, obviously seeing the first 3 episodes, seeing the trailer, kind of everything coming out. I thought it was going to be good coming out, but it's better than I expected.
That's great. I'm glad you like it.
And it's different than I expected in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Clearly, like, you know, from my perspective, I've been covering basically The Chosen for the last 4 years. So everything that's come out from The Chosen, every, you know, interview, every trailer, everything, right? Every behind the scenes clip, I've been dissecting and kind of talking about. And so for me, I'm really acclimatized to The Chosen and how The Chosen does things. And seeing the first 3 episodes of House of David feels so much different. In a good way. I think it's not like a better or worse thing. I think it's just different. I think some people are going to prefer House of David, and some people are going to prefer The Chosen, which I've already seen in my community, actually. There's been people that have been really surprised, kind of coming to the conclusion of, like, wow, I actually resonated with House of David maybe a little bit more than The Chosen, which surprised them a bit.
You know, it's kind of what I like. Here was one of the big limiting factors in faith film for a long time, was people felt like this is a genre. It's not. Christianity, first of all, I love it that it's called faith film. Like, what does that even mean? Like, faith in what? Faith requires an object. So let's talk about Christianity. You know, it's an underserved, underseen audience that I'm a part of. It's a cause. It's a message that will change your life that we're trying to infuse into the material. It's not a genre.
Yeah.
And so what I learned was these films, like, Jesus Revolution was like a love letter to Cameron Crowe movies, like Almost Famous. American Underdog is a sports biopic, done a couple of those, so I always felt like David was, in its essence, a hero's journey.
Right.
It was very mythic, in its archetypes.
Yep.
And what I like about that is that I was hoping to create an experience that could emulate the experience I had with Harry Potter. Like, I was not, I didn't read the books. My kids were a little too young. We didn't see the movies. But, FOMO drives my entertainment decisions, so I have the fear of missing out. So I think it was Half-Blood Prince came out. So I'm finally okay, I'm going to go, what is this phenomena that's Harry Potter? So I go in, and I remember, I don't know what this school is. I don't know what these magic spells are. I don't know anything. But I do know that I'm crying because this Dumbledore dude that's obviously Obi-Wan Kenobi is dying.
Yeah.
The kid with the glasses is obviously Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
So the archetypes were so clear that I found the story accessible even though I didn't know really much about it. And so that's what I hoped House of David would be, is that it is in the context of the Bible. I guess Joseph to an extent, and I'm really looking forward to what Dallas does with that, because it's like kind of Monte Cristo,
Yep.
But David is where all those classic mythic archetypes. If you're a fan of the book that influenced George Lucas heavily was this book, Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell.
Yep.
Talks about comparative mythology and this common story, which I think proves that we're wired for a savior.
100%.
And we're also wired for destiny. Joseph Campbell's point was that this same story of the hero's journey emerged in all these cultures that could not contact each other.
Right.
So whether it's the Odyssey or whatever, all these stories are being told that have the same archetype and architecture. So it has to be written on our soul somehow, right?
Yeah.
This need for an adventure, this need for destiny, and this need for a savior. And so I just began to be very interested in that sort of overlay, and I just felt like there's things about House of David that are definitely a love letter to The Chosen. Yeah. And Dallas, is just one of the great friends of my life and collaborators, and the story of how we met and is pretty hilarious, and sort of how we've worked together. So the accent and hopefully the authenticity of his work is what's such a standout, and that certainly rubs off on House of David, and I hope you feel that a little bit.
Right.
Certainly we both love the material and are trying to honor it as best we can, and stay true to the source material. But beyond that, House of David is in a completely different genre.
Yep.
And so you can love both shows because they're as different, as The Wire, which heavily influenced Dallas, is from Game of Thrones, which heavily influenced House of David. And one's a incredible character drama, and then one, House of David, just by nature of the story, is in this sort of hero's journey, coming of age, and you're not trying to force those things onto the story. They're actually all there. With Goliath, Samuel is as much of an archetype of Gandalf and Obi-Wan Kenobi as you could get. So my hope is that people will find the story accessible and then be interested in the book. What Dallas and I both say is this is not scripture. This is but hope it's a love letter to Scripture. Scripture is Scripture,
100%.
But my hope is that I just got a text, I think I mentioned, from a buddy of mine, Bobby, who created this app, the YouVersion Bible app. It's amazing. It's the Bible on your phone.
Yeah, it's great.
He was saying there's 115% increase over the first weekend that House of David was out in searches for David, King David.
Yeah.
And I just think if you haven't read the Bible in a while, or ever, start with the Gospel of John. But beyond that, the Psalms of David, if you want to just relate to words in the Bible, the Psalms are some of the most relatable words you'll ever read. And I think it's a great it's a great entry point into the Bible. And so that's my hope, is that people will read this dude's words.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I exist.
Right?
That's the destiny that God has me in, where I'm kind of pioneering this place of, there's nobody online that does what I do. There's nobody online that breaks down these shows in the granularity that I do and kind of brings it back to Scripture.
It's great.
And so that's what I love about what's happening right now in this year, is not only House of David, but all these other things that are coming out,
cool, right?
That God's just doing something big, you know?
Yeah. I tell people, I'm a filmmaker. I set the volleyball.
Yeah.
Other people spike it.
Yeah.
Pastors, I tell people there is a landslide uprising going on in Hollywood right now on behalf of Christianity and values.
Yep.
But Hollywood's not the hope of the world. The local church is the hope of the world.
Yeah.
And so, but I like being the Air Force, you know.
Right.
And so this stuff will instigate, but it has to lead to a conversation.
Right.
For it to truly take.
Yeah.
And so, I like this relationship a lot, and it's fun to. I've never had anything that I've ever done have like, trailer breakdowns or trailer reaction videos.
Right.
We wanted to do something where we still haven't done it yet, where we did reaction to the reaction videos, where we're just like Michael and I, because it's just so cool to see something spark a conversation like this.
Hey, if you're really enjoying this interview and you want to see more from these people like Jon Erwin and Dallas Jenkins, then I've got a whole nother video for you over on Patreon only. Go ahead and sign up in the link in the description down below, snipesupport.com, for $5, $10, or $25, and you can see an amazing video where I ask them 10 questions and see how they respond to things like the future of biblical media and what that's going to look like. How do they think that bad actors are going to play a role in the future of what's happening here, and how people are going to be money grubbing and things like that, and even their own personal lives. In one part of the interview, Dallas even gets a little bit emotional. So if you want to see that, it's over on Patreon, and I'd love for you to check it out. Link in the description down below. Let's get back to the video. Yeah, I'm super excited for it. I want to jump into the writing and the writing team. Mm-hmm. What does it look like behind the scenes in terms of source material, all that kind of stuff? Clearly, you guys are drifting into a lot of Jewish traditions as well. I think maybe more than The Chosen does at times.
Yeah.
And so I definitely want to jump into that. But let's talk about the writing itself. What does the writing team look like? What is this process looking like?
We have a great writer's room and some really talented writers. Of course, the primary collaboration for me on this project is with John Gunn. Okay. We've written 5 movies together. I just think he's one of the other great creatives and voices in the space. And I think what he does so well is the human element of anything. Like if you look at his film like Ordinary Angels or The Case for Christ, he finds the humanity in the stories. So I wanted to primarily collaborate with him. And then we also formed we have a writer's room, we have a writer's team. Right. And we just sort of break the stories and then when it comes to research, I think what I've learned is the clearer your vision is, the more you can listen to people. So a lot of people say, I have a lot of filmmakers, I have such a clear vision, I'm not going to listen to anybody. You have insecurity, you know. If you have a real clear vision, you instantly know if ideas fit within your vision. Right. So what I tell people is like I'm very rigid to the vision, but loose to tactics. Right. You know, where I know the experience I want to create, I know the story I want to tell. And then you really want to listen. So the idea of listening to as many experts as you can is really important. I mean, there's people that have sort of dedicated their lives to this stuff, and so the main contributor to The Chosen, he was a big on the Come and See side. He was a big part of sort of looking over the scripts very early on. In a way that we'll be able to tell this story as the show moves forward. You know, Ryan, the lead writer of The Chosen, was very helpful to me in breaking down the story. Like I knew the story I wanted to tell, but I was a film director, and he's just one of the great architects. Yeah, like a story architect, and so he did a lot of work, with me very early on, and just sort of the architecture of season 1 and how to lay out the story. He was very helpful. We have a lot of both Christian scholars and Jewish scholars, and people that are experts in rabbinic tradition. And then I've got Greg Laurie, his pastor. Yeah. He's like if the production had a pastor, it'd be Greg, and also he's just a huge influence in my life, and he's been with me every step of the way to just get the story right. And so you take in all those influences, and what I like is this term Ken Burns calls emotional archaeology, where you're really trying to unearth what would this have actually been like. And with David, it's very interesting that you have the heart of this man in a very unique way, because of the Psalms. And I like to point out he did not have to write any of those. Like, history is written by the victor, and so we didn't have to know about Bathsheba. We didn't have to know about any of the incredible honesty of the Psalms was voluntary. Like, he did not have to do that. And then you have the historical record in 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then you have fragments of things. So it's about kind of being a sleuth detective and trying to say what stories would justify. Season 1 of House of David's like 3 chapters, all of which could be read in 15 or 20 minutes. So if we just went with the text,
there's definitely some like things that are grabbed from other places and setups that are coming for future seasons, which I want to definitely get to.
But I'm saying that if you just sort of read the text, it would be a very short first season. So you're all about how do you grapple with these with what we have, and create. You really think about entertainment or a television show is, first, it's a love letter to the Bible itself. It's not the Bible itself. Remember that. Secondly, think about it as its own form of commentary. Really, it's whenever you read biblical commentary, for one verse you can read 3 chapters of commentary. There is a sort of commentary with the material because it's us grappling with what's there. And then sort of wrestling it down into a narrative form, and then trying to make the most entertaining TV show that we can. First and foremost, that's my first job, and the job. I'm an entertainer. So trying to create something that's entertaining, not hard to do with David. And so that's kind of where it starts, and then you just do your best to wrestle it to the ground, and then hopefully. George Lucas said films are never complete; they're only abandoned. So hopefully, people will realize that there will be mistakes for sure, but even those mistakes are done through the lens of great reverence and love for the material itself. And I want people to know that. And I also love this conversation that's starting. And kind of welcoming the audience into the process of us wrestling the material to the ground as best we can.
I think you guys are going to run into some similar controversies that The Chosen has, of course.
It's already started.
People are always going to complain about certain specific things, which, of course, we'll talk about in detail and kind of break down why you did the things that you did.
But isn't that great, though? What I love about it, I didn't mean to interrupt. That's my ADHD brain.
Totally good.
But what I love about that is, even in the disagreements, that means that there's a conversation. And the biggest goal of this is to bring the Bible back into the zeitgeist, to get the Bible back into the conversation. And in aggregate, this really is like the year of the Bible. I've never seen anything like this before in my career in entertainment. I think you'd have to go back. I was talking with Jonathan Rumi about this. I mean, you have to go back decades and decades to get back to a moment like this where the Bible is on display in a profound way in the entertainment industry. So I like, even in the disagreements, like I can tell you all the reasons. Like, what I love about it is that for a year, I haven't had anybody to talk to about these things because we've been making the show, except the experts in the writing team. But like everything that the internet is questioning are things that we've thought about from every angle for years, you know, and so it's fun to even in the disagreements, it means that people are talking about the Bible again, and that's really cool.
So let me pick your brain a little bit about things I've heard from the first 3 episodes, and some things that I think people will complain about, no matter how justified or not they are. Number 1, I think, is definitely people were caught off guard by David's family relationship with his mom, and so you guys take the stance of more of a Jewish traditional stance of like Nitzivet is an actual person who's not named in the Bible, but that she's there and that she has specific things about her. So tell me about that process with her.
So here's what's there in the text. You have all these ways in which David refers to himself that make you go, interesting. So, one of the more profound ones is in Psalm 51, Psalm on repentance. He says, he says he was conceived in iniquity. And so did my mother conceive me. I was born in iniquity, and so did my mother conceive me. Now, one could say that's just a spiritual reference. But then in Psalm 69, he says, basically, I'm like a stranger to my father's sons, and that word is mamzer, I think is how you say it.
Okay.
It's the Hebrew word for bastard.
Okay.
And then he talks about how he was an ostracized kid. Like basically, at the city gates, like the picture that he paints is basically in the Psalms is like, it's like if somebody was to walk out the gates like, hey, look, see there, that's what happens. That's what happens when you make mistakes is look, that little kid over there, that, you know. Yeah. So he was definitely talked about himself as an outcast in his own family and in his town. And then you have him saying that he was birthed in iniquity, and whether you take that literal or spiritual.
Right, right.
So then you have to ask, okay, then what happens when Samuel comes to town? First of all, I'm so grateful that we got the great Stephen Lang to play Samuel, because I felt like a prophet of God has never been portrayed in a way that's so formidable as I would see them, in the sense that, when Samuel came to town, to Bethlehem, all the elders come out, and it's like a Western. Like they're literally like, "Do you come peaceably? Like you're not gonna make a problem in this town here, are you?" That type thing. Yeah. So this dude was scary. He was there was a power to him. So then he comes to Jesse and says, "Gather your sons." So you're gonna tell me that Jesse, in the presence of this guy that everyone is terrified of, that everyone reveres, is gonna just forget? Oh yeah, I do have another kid. Right. I don't buy that. Like and so I have to think that there was some reason why he intentionally kept David hidden away. Right. Especially when this great seer Samuel says, "I want all your sons." Yeah. That's not, you don't just forget. Yeah.
And then plus this Jewish tradition that's already here in place to kind of explain some of that.
So then you have Jewish tradition, and there's several kind of lines of thought with Jewish tradition. The main one is very, very hard to dramatize or even describe, which is sort of like a look it up. It's a but the idea is, even in the main line of thought from Jewish tradition, that David was seen as a bastard kid. Right. In his household and in his town, right, and that basically his father had C-sex relations with his mom, was going to have a child by a servant, and then it's kind of a Rachel and Leah swap thing, right. Which again is impossible to even conceive of or justify or dramatize, but the point is, in Jewish tradition, David, was seen by his family and by his town as illegitimate. Right. And the other thing is that I've really thought a lot about is the great writer Aaron Sorkin said that when you adapt a true story, of which this will be like 8 or 9 true stories in a row for me.
That's crazy.
The difference is I can call Greg and Kathy Laurie and say, "Where were you in 1971?" I can call Kurt and Brenda Warner and say, "Where were you in 1994?" Right. Can't do that here. But you do learn some things. And one of the things that Sorkin says is he says, it's not a photograph, it's a portrait. Right. You're trying to paint a portrait. Right. And so you're having to, the typical conceits involve compressing timelines and compositing characters.
Yep. And geography as well.
And geography, You're right. To tell a story that you're able to tell in the time you're able to tell it. So that's sort of the guiding principle. But you want to create an accurate portrait. And I think with the Bible, there's also something of like, what are the facts, but also what is the truth of this? Yeah. And those are two different things. And that's weird to say, but I've seen other biblical adaptations that there were some facts. There was another David's of Gods and Prophets, which did not do it for me on many, many levels. But there were some facts considered, but I felt like they missed the truth of the story. Right. And I don't buy those facts. Like the idea that David was 28, I don't buy that. Right. Right. But anyway, but the truth, I feel, of the gospel and of Christianity, that I felt like I only have these parts, but I feel like this is true, is that God uses the weak things of the world to confound the wise. Right. God, there's a line in episode 7, spoiler, where someone, I won't say who, says to David, God chooses the unlikely objects because he sees what's inside them.
Right.
And so I felt like it was consistent with the truth of the story as I knew it, that God would choose an outcast,
Right. Yeah.
to be Israel's greatest king.
Yeah.
And he would choose someone that everyone else despised to say, look at what I'm going to do through this person. I felt like that was consistent with the truth of the story of Christianity in general. And I found these fragments of facts to be absolutely undeniable. So we invented a narrative around David and his mom that I felt got to the truth of the story and how society and his family viewed him,
Right.
As best we could.
Yeah.
Is this what happened? I have no idea. It's not in the Bible, and it's really not even in Jewish tradition.
Yeah.
At least not clearly.
Right.
But I do feel that this is commentary to get to the truth of the story, if that makes sense.
Right. Spoiler alert for later episodes if you're not watching through the episodes yet, but why have her die early on?
That's a good question, and it's related to the end of the story.
Okay.
This was a lot of debate. I wanted David to be as isolated as possible in the course of the story.
Right.
His mom is not, his mother, what other mothers in the Bible are talked about a lot, his mom is not mentioned at all, except for one verse,
Right.
which we have a way to deal with. When he basically is hiding out in sort of the Robin Hood phase of his life, he says, can I put my father and mother here? So the story I wanted to tell, I wanted him to be as isolated and lonely as possible in the beginning.
Okay.
And I don't want to spoil it, but there's a way in which a lot of times what you want to create as a writer is you want to create something where the characters in the story think they know their history, but it was actually there's a spin.
Right.
Like one of the great ones is Luke, I Am Your Father, right? Makes you rethink two whole movies.
Right.
But there's a way in which we turn the story at the end of the season that I find to be the most powerful and spiritually powerful. There's a scene between Samuel and Jesse that about offering our very best, and that those are the sacrifices that are most worthy. That's my favorite scene of the season, and so it comes around in a way that was that I think is very powerful and fitting to the story, and I needed a character as isolated as possible with as few people around him as possible. So again, that's one of the reasons why there's just not a ton of people in his life early on in the story. Right.
And everybody's kind of against him, even Joab, or even these are people that are kind of in these first 3 episodes. Another question that I got a lot was, why not have all of Jesse's sons at the anointing?
This is funny.
I figure there's an explanation, but this is definitely
a dumb explanation, though. This is a dumb... we couldn't find enough local actors in Greece. I hate to say it but we basically, number one, we could only really cast 3 of his brothers as like, we're going to dive into these characters. Mm-hmm. And so then we had a couple of others as like extras, but frankly, we just, I mean, this is such a dumb thing to say. We ran out of time. And we couldn't have any more speaking roles, and we couldn't really delve into the brothers of David. So again, that's one of those where we just had to composite.
Right.
So there's 5 instead of 7. But it was really a production limitation. It's why, I mean, again, spoiler alert, it's why Goliath only has 5 fingers instead of 6.
Right.
When that handprint is on the wall, there's two.
There's two. Like, I
that's the way we dealt with it. Is like I want to see basically did he move his pinky or is that 6 fingers? But we literally did the cost analysis on what it would take for him to have 6 fingers the whole season,
all the time,
and it was not within the realm of our budget.
And you don't want like some janky prosthetic or something.
We thought about that too. It would have looked terrible. And so we kind of winked at it early, and then just hope the audience doesn't like look at his hands and count them. But that's just one of those things where it's again, compositing and compressing is typically how you do it. In every film I've ever done, Jesus Revolution, Chuck Smith had more kids, but we could only focus on one of them. Right. And so a lot of times you just have to composite, and so we had to composite David's brothers just because of the scope of the story and the circumstances and just the production limitations. I think what's funny is that a lot of people are talking about House of David as having this enormous budget. It doesn't.
Really?
But, we're using every dollar. I mean, we're shooting the show on this camera called the Sony FX3, which we have a bunch of them. But I mean,
and
it's a $4,000 camera.
Virtual production, right?
We're doing virtual production this season.
Okay.
The whole a little bit, but the whole theme of House of David was to do a love letter to Fellowship of the Ring, specifically, and Braveheart, of like go out and do it for real. Get out in the environment. Yeah. So when you're watching House of David and the wind is ripping, it's because we're in Greece and the wind is ripping. Yeah. And there's just a reality to location-based filmmaking. But it really is about stretching every dollar and trying to make every dollar look like $5 on the screen. Yeah. And so the show is not without its limitations, and we're trying to do something that looks much bigger but for a lot of the larger series that House of David is actually competing with right now, which is so cool. Yeah. Our whole season costs less than one episode of those series, so it's not. We're making it look big, but it's actually a scrappy show.
Yeah. Going back to Goliath, there are 3 characters that I want to chat about because I think they're very interesting. And when they popped up on screen, I found myself being like, "Oh, that's awesome that they put them in here." First being the Witch of Endor. Mm-hmm. This is a really interesting character that, of course, is going to come up later. This is kind of a setup, but I had never thought about the possibility of them, why they would know the witch in the first place, or how she's kind of connected. I love that you added her in there with Ahinoam and with Abner and that whole section there. How are you thinking about that character?
Well, that's actually the character Messiah that's in the show, and I can talk about why. This has come up for me of why is there magic in the show, why is there sort of a darkness, which there's reasons for, but she is not the Witch of Endor. She's from Endor, and the Witch of Endor is someone that we are going to meet, obviously. Very cool. And that is much more formidable than her. But again, if you dig into rabbinic tradition, it really gets interesting, and the Witch of Endor is actually the mother in rabbinic tradition of one of the key characters in House of David. Okay. And we do get into that as the story progresses. What I found interesting and why I introduced this as a theme is because, I find it interesting in the Old Testament when they say that the Lord of hosts, they're basically saying the God that's greater than all the other gods. Right. So what you got to understand about that time is it was a very spiritual time. Everyone had their gods. The Philistines had their gods. The Amalekites had their gods. Yep. So that it meant something, and I really like that we got the dialogue in there when Achish, king of the Philistines, says basically, David says to him, the God of gods, and he's like, there could be no other, and he said, we don't need another. Right. And so a big question in that time was like, whose God is greater? Yeah. And it was a very spiritual time. And so magic, there are fragments of it that Saul had outlawed it, mediums. So that's why when he goes to the Witch of Endor in the Bible, kind of she's scared. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But also, it's a part of their like Michal hides an idol under the bed when David escapes. So there was a presence of this stuff in the household. Yep. So I began to think, how did this stuff get in the household? Yeah. And what we began to speculate was, what happens to the wife of a king? I always felt like I wanted to portray Saul's story through tragedy. Yeah. And not through. I didn't want a villain. I wanted someone that was just addicted to power and couldn't give it up. Right, and you realize there's a goodness in this man. Right. There's goodness in this man's family.
And he's surrounded by enablers too.
Yeah, but he cannot give up that throne. Right. In fact, I often question when Samuel visited him and confronts him, and I love that scene. It's basically word for word out of the Bible. Yeah. If he would have just said, okay, if God doesn't want me to wear this crown, I wouldn't have a good story to tell in House of David, but here, take it. Let me help whoever God chooses. He probably would have been able to just live out his days in peace. Instead, he could not give up the throne and could not give up what he was no longer meant to steward. Right. So I wanted to tell the story of the House of Saul through that lens of the crumbling and disintegration of a family because of this guy's addiction to power. Yeah. And so what we felt like was what would it be like for the wife of that man who's been by his side for 25 years? Yeah. In House of David, we call it the triangle of drama, and this drives the show. So if you want to talk about what what the driving force of the show is this triangle of if the triangle has three ends, you put God, family, country, and you put characters in a situation where they have to choose one at the expense of the other two.
Right.
So it's easy to love one thing, it's hard to love two. So we constantly put characters in this triangle and say, who does Jonathan choose in that triangle?
Right.
Who does David choose? Ahinoam chooses family above all. She is protect the family above everything else.
She even has that
God.
line, I think it's in episode 3, where she's like I'll do literally anything. She's lying to this woman's face after her son has just been killed, and it's like, I will do anything to protect my family. I know how you feel, you know? It's just like,
which is so terrible. But that's how we saw it, and then I had to have some justifiable. A lot of times, what you have to do in adapting the Bible is you have to back the story up. So, okay, we have the Witch of Endor.
Yep.
We have remnants of magic and sort of idols in Saul's household.
Yep.
So how do they get there? And a lot of the work of what we do is to try to tell these stories that justifiably lead to events that are in the Bible. Well, to do that, you have to start.
Out of nowhere, it doesn't feel
natural. It doesn't feel natural at all.
Yeah.
So you have to actually, like, if you read your Bible, Doeg.
Yes, this is what I was going to go to next.
A pretty profound thing later on in the story.
Yeah.
We have to set that up.
Yeah, him meeting the priest in Nob, I was like, ah!
Yeah, you know what's coming.
I was like, this is
spoiler.
So cool. And I didn't recognize the character immediately. It was really interesting. My wife and I were sitting on the couch watching the episodes, and immediately when Doeg comes out, she goes, wait, Doeg the herdsman? Doeg the Edomite? I was like, wait, how did you know that?
Yeah.
She was the first one to recognize it, and then as we dug into research, we were like, oh man, this is going to be so good. So,
but I want you want a character that's kind of like a whisperer and a manipulator of power, and Ashraf does such a great job in that role. But you're trying to start themes early that will pay off with what's in the Bible reasonably.
Right.
Like, I think if you read your Bible and understand what Doeg does, that's a kind of like the moment Saul becomes Darth Vader, basically.
Yes.
Is what Doeg does is. You get that from the character. Oh, that guy would totally do that, and so you sort of build those themes to these, turns in the story.
Yeah, and the last character that I wanted to bring up before we talk about the future is Orpah.
Yeah,
Orpah is a really interesting one as well. So interesting that I love the way that you wrote it there, because the scene right before we hear Samuel talk to Jesse and call him son of Boaz, and then that kind of connects our mind to that time, and then we see Orpah appear right after that. Such an interesting character. Were you worried about kind of the mysticism of that, or like what's kind of happening there?
I just, I find the mysticism innate to this story is so incredibly interesting. Like again, I've had a lot of questions about the Nephilim and the origin of Goliath, which we deal with in a future episode and hint at in the first 3.
Yep.
But which there's very specific reasons that we're doing that, and they're biblical. But one of the things that, for me at least, the key that unlocked the project, a lot of times as a creative, sometimes you have to have a way into a story.
Yes, Dallas talks about this a lot.
So the way into this story for me was the title. So the oldest relic ever discovered was this, how do you say it, Stella Steel?
Steel, yeah.
And it was actually somebody had defeated the House of David, and it had a few accomplishments in it, but it said House of David, and it was like 950 BC.
Is this the Moabite stone?
Yeah. And so I just found that title, House of David, to be interesting, that this is a war of houses. Aaron Sorkin talks about the basic function of drama in a story is intention, obstacle. What's the intention? What's the obstacle? And you want to establish that as soon as you can.
Yeah.
And so with House of David, I felt like, seeing it through that lens of a war of houses, definitely, I like those kind of stories. And so with the House of Saul, you want to try to suspend judgment a little bit. And what I like about when you watch Avengers, with Thanos.
Yeah.
I like it when there's a villain that you at least understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Right.
Like, okay, Thanos believes half the universe should die to save the other half. Don't agree,
Right.
but at least I understand what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's the hero of his own story.
Yeah.
And so I felt like with Goliath and his house, I wanted to, at the very least, humanize the character to where we understood who he thought he was and what his driving motivation was. And then connect that to Jewish history and tradition. And so we do meet Orpah, who in tradition is the mother of giants.
Right.
And then the story that she tells her kids, and that one of the things often overlooked in the Bible is that, because when you dramatize this, I had to grapple with why, what is it when a character, this character Goliath struck fear into the Israel army, into the army of Israel for 40 days.
Yeah.
So, there's theories that he just had giantism and he was kind of almost blind. Malcolm Gladwell popularized that in his book, which I love Malcolm Gladwell's work. I don't agree with that because some big guy with giantism and blind could not scare an army for 40 days. Like there had to be something terrifying about this guy.
Yeah.
So then you go on the rabbit trail of why would Israel be so terrified of a tall guy? Well, when Moses sends spies into the land, 10 spies, they come out and they say, the beautiful land, flowing with milk and honey.
Yep.
But there's fortified cities.
Yep.
There's giants there.
Yep.
There's tall people. And the sons of Anak are there, basically, in addition to the way it's right. So at least the stories around the campfire, regardless of what was true with Goliath, the stories that people of Israel would have told themselves, and the campfire stories would have been that there were descendants of the Nephilim, basically like demigods.
Right.
And that would have been the fear they would have associated with Goliath.
Right.
So he would have struck more fear than just his size. What he would have struck and what they would have believed, and I think that that's justifiable, is that, oh my gosh, that's a descendant of the Nephilim.
Right.
That's basically like in our day, that's like, oh, that's Thor, you know?
Right.
That's a demigod.
Right.
And that's how afraid they would have been. I feel, based off what's there. So we go into that. We go into, this is what Goliath would have believed he was. This is what Israel would have believed he was.
Right.
And this is why he would have been so terrifying beyond his size. And we do it through the lens of, is it true? I don't know.
Right.
But that's what do you think? But that's what he would have thought. And so a big part of that was was Orpah. Yeah. And I like how we deal with it. Like even when Alexander, who plays Akish, says, that's impossible. And she's like, well, and yet you're right here.
You're still here.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how we deal with it. But I love the mythology. I love the mystery of it.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of fun in the mysterious elements to the story, and they're there, and they're cool, and they're great for a filmmaker.
Right.
And so I love going into those aspects of the story.
Awesome. Well, as the last thing in this section here, let's talk about the future. So, how many seasons do you know that you're planning for House of David, or are there future projects? What is one project?
This is a spoiler alert. But I can only tell you, what my intention is. I've always felt with David. I've always felt like the story I wanted to tell. Because you got to think, is the destination worth it?
Right.
Because there is a lot that goes on in this story. This character, his accomplishments are as high as his failures are as low.
Yeah.
Not a perfect character.
Yeah.
Makes some big mistakes.
Depends on how you look at it. It's a pretty perfect character for a TV
For a TV series, it's great. and I identify with that. I mean, I made some horrific mistakes in my life, and it's nice to know that God can use anybody, and that even in the mistakes we make, there's redemption. So for me, the bookends to the entire story, if I were, to be able to tell the entire story, which will be based on the audience's support, which, by the way, at this first stage is staggering. Yeah. I mean, it's blowing away everyone's expectation globally. For it to go straight to number 2 and hang there is far beyond our wildest imaginations. Yeah. And it's competing with, and in fact, outperforming things that are 5 times its budget. Huge stuff. Yeah. But I always felt like if I were to tell the whole story, I've always felt like the bookends to the story I wanted to tell were 2 young men crying out to God. One in the obscure fields of Bethlehem, this outcast that nobody saw, and another all these decades in saga. I mean, an odyssey later, which is David's son Solomon on the Temple Mount, beckoning God to earth. And I think that prayer that Solomon prays, where he welcomes God into the temple, doing what his father couldn't do, it was not allowed to do. And Solomon being Bathsheba's son, so son of David's worst mistake, so God can redeem anything. That prayer is what makes the saga worth it to me. And so that has always been the bookends of the story if I were able to tell the complete story. Right. And so right now we're working on that hero's journey, the ascent of the character. And, if the audience supports it, we'll keep getting green lights and we'll keep making the story. Right. And what I tell people is what's creating this moment in time that we're in is the power of our unified voice as Christians. We've gotten so loud, and things have been successful. Jesus' Revolution was successful. I can only imagine was successful. The Chosen has become a global phenomenon. And that is what's giving us the power to harness some of these platforms like Amazon, which I consider like the Roman road of our time. Like Christianity first went out on the road. We did not build roads. Right. Rome built roads. Right. They were not built for proselytizing. They were built for military expansion, but they were there, and we used them. Mass media, mass entertainment is really the Roman road of our time. And it's this enormous way to get the gospel to the world. But, we have to have control of the material. So the fact that Amazon and Prime Video is giving us creative control, right, to myself, to Dallas, and yet we have the full support of their global reach is an unprecedented moment in the entertainment industry. And so they will keep funding the content the more we make our voice heard together. I tell people it's like Jericho. The walls of Jericho fell down. The last step was when Israel, under Joshua, they unified their voice. They made their voice one. That's when and so the more that we do that, the more that opportunities like this will happen. But that would be if I were able to tell the complete story. That's the bookends to. So spoiler. that's where I would consider the saga complete at that point.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for your time.
This is cool. Great conversation,
Very much
man.
Appreciate it.
This is the first sit down long form conversation I've had about House of David.
Awesome.
So you should know that.
Cool.
I've done snippet interviews, but I've wanted to have a conversation, a proper conversation. So thanks so much.